Hi, everyone. I'm going to pick this up. Thank you so much for coming to the Wisconsin Book Festival. First day, first event of this 4-day weekend. I'm so excited. My name is Denise S. Robbins. I'm an author as well. I wrote the speculative climate fiction novel, The Unmapping, and today I'll be talking with Olivia Wolfgang-Smith about her new amazing book, Mutual Interest. I want to extend a huge thanks to the Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation and all of the sponsors for helping make this amazing event possible. For just a little housekeeping, if everyone could please silence their phones, and then we will do a little reading, do a little talking, and then we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So if you have any questions, just start thinking about that. And then we'll have books for sale in the lobby right afterwards and a signing as well. So Olivia Wolfgang-Smith is the author of Mutual Interest as well as Glassworks, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, Apple, and Good Housekeeping. She's a 2024 New York State Council on the Arts and New York Foundation for the Arts Artist Fellow in Fiction, lives in Brooklyn with her partner, and this isn't on her resume, but she was crowned Queen Bee in yesterday's New York Times Spelling Bee. Now her new book, Mutual Interest, which was published earlier this year, takes place at the very beginning of the 20th century, following Vivian Lesperance, a young queer woman who is deeply ambitious, determined to escape her stifling small town in upstate New York. She finagles her way into the wealthy circles of New York City, but still faces limitations as a woman unable to vote or own property or operate a business. But she can find the right men to help her along, which she does through our other two main characters, Oscar Schmidt and Squire Clancy. Oscar is a quiet man from Ohio, and Squire is an eccentric heir to a family fortune, and they're rivals in business, with Oscar making soap and Squire making candles, and they're fighting over the same materials until Vivian brings them together and forms a powerful partnership while she works behind the scenes. This is loosely inspired by the origin story of Procter & Gamble, which was also founded by two former enemies, with a twist that this third female entity is the one pulling the strings in this novel. But it's also about so much more than these characters and their empire of soap. As the narrator writes, our subject is change. Some change is so gradual it cannot be tracked with a human eye. Some is cataclysmic. This sort of change is what historical fiction in general can provide, a lens onto today's changing landscape. The book is not just a step into the past, but a filter on the now. And it's also a real joy to read. You have all these characters who you might not like in real life, like Vivian, for instance, who becomes desperate for control in a situation where she feels powerless, and Squire, who becomes obsessed with sewers and caves. And then there's Oscar, who is this slightly boring, but very loving, solid force beneath it all. And the other twist on the history of this story is that Squire and Oscar fall in love in a very wonderful relationship that carries through the story's highs and lows. The narrative voice is fresh and fun, and the topic feels both timeless and new, so I'm very excited to welcome Olivia to talk about Mutual Interest today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you so much, Denise, for setting up the novel. I feel like I don't have to do anything now, which is great. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the festival and this amazing library. This is my first time in Madison, but it will not be my last. I'm already obsessed with it. So I'm going to read a little bit just to start off from near the introduction of one of the three main characters who Denise kind of gave us the rundown on. This is Squire Clancy, who's the kind of black sheep of an old money New York family. And when we meet him, he is a very rich, very weird young man who is kind of in the process of realizing that he's too weird to get away with, even for a very rich person. So this is a little bit from his first chapter. On both sides, the Squire Sacerdotes and the Clancys, Squire was descended from as close to real aristocracy as New York could boast. It had been many generations since members of either clan had worked for a living. Neither family in New York's collective memory, which trended long on such matters, had produced a scandal. This happy situation left Squire's parents totally unprepared for the challenge of raising their son. As soon as he was old enough to have a personality, Squire exhibited a strange one. He had almost a scientific mind. This alone would have been concerning enough, but applied seemingly at random and with a single-minded, sometimes even destructive fixation. He ruined an intricate fire screen of taxidermy hummingbirds, writing the Latin name of each species directly onto the linen backdrop. He made several mistakes, which he corrected by smearing ink over the errors with his bare fingers. He was an enthusiast, not an aesthete. He drew intricate maps on drafting paper, first of New York, its familiar main stems and numbered cross streets, then of Spain and Africa, then, most unsettling to his parents, a land of no physical reality, with frothing pink waterfalls cascading from lime-green Himalayas. He had a constant yet mutable fascination with atlases in general. In various phases, he charted the depths of the world's largest lakes, the lengths of its rivers, the heights of its mountains. To his parents, who might at least have understood, indeed who pressured him fruitlessly toward, the sporting ambition of tourism, Squire's interest in geography seemed so purely mathematical as to be nonsense. But in his own mind, Squire was building a catalog of the universe. He could feel, flipping the pages, that the Nile ran north but the Mississippi south. He could trace ancient glaciers in the lake beds left by their clawing fingers. How did the world work? Why did it work? He was instinctively devoted to mapping the invisible. Despite a persistent failure to be formally educated, Squire read too much. Indeed, they could not keep him from it, and absorbed only the strangest ideas. From the adventures of Tom Sawyer, for instance, he retained only a loud and insistent fascination with caves, often expressed in mixed company by macabre questions about how long one might survive in various systems, or whether human beings thus trapped might eventually adapt beyond the need for eyes, like certain fish he'd read about. A family of the Clancy's standing could afford one curious subspecies of domestic harmony. They had the resources to avoid each other. Considering Squire too dangerous a liability to allow in town, his parents scaled back to opening their house on Madison Avenue only a few times a year. Thereafter, Squire lived most of the time with his mother, who had marginally more patience for him, in their summer place on Lake Ronkonkoma. His father kept a lonely watch over the Hudson and Palisades in the winter country estate that Squire and his mother visited principally for the family's storied annual Christmas party. It was during this same period that Squire became, without the benefit of forewarning or advice, a man. His body was an instrument he learned to use in secret and isolation as he experienced most pleasures. He was in time an autodidact virtuoso. He understood, based on the baffling decisions of characters in novels and on the slippery ellipses implied in etiquette guides and on the anthropological observation of his supposed peers, that intimacy was something normally experienced as a connection between multiple people. In his own experience, it was simply one more valence of solitary exploration. Things came to a head at the turn of the century when Squire was 25. He spent much of that year in deep passion over Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, though in his typical fashion he had eyes only for the chapters meticulously detailing the history and layout of the Parisian sewer system. Indeed, Squire had almost never felt a stronger connection to another human being than the one he felt to Hugo on his first reading. The novelist interrupting his action at its very apex, the doomed revolutionary's last stand, to run to thousands of words on the subject of fetid municipal infrastructure. Squire cut the pages with trembling hands. He was particularly interested in sewers in the months thereafter, learning as much as he could about different systems across the world. By December 1899, it took only the slightest conversational opening, and sometimes not even that, to set Squire loose on the topic of the sewer system, like a whirling natural wonder himself, a cyclone of enthusiasm that tore through general conversation, lifting trees by their roots. When Squire held forth, his cheeks flushed, his hair stood on end where he worked his fingers through it. He fluttered his hands, squinting at the ceiling to summon a number or fact, leading himself down a winding tunnel into the noxious dark, speaking with breathless enthusiasm of forgotten systems of ancient pipes and the bodies of victims of terrible crimes and rats as big as dogs, rats that had never seen the sun. If Squire's parents had thought things could not possibly get worse, this latest fad disabused them of the notion. And I'll condense a little bit, but this is the day of the big family Christmas party, and Squire's parents have sat him down to forbid him from talking about sewers at the party. Squire had not been planning to. He never planned to, but he had been himself long enough to know his limitations, and he knew he was being given an impossible mandate. He was about to navigate 50 conversations with people he hadn't seen in a year, all of them wolfish gossips full of false sympathy, with normal sons who had spent their first years of adulthood at Harvard or Yale or carousing abroad instead of invalided halfway out Long Island. He was about to weather 50 polite, pitying inquiries as to how he had been amusing himself lately. "Just please no sewers," his mother said. "Just for tonight, you can't bring them up with these people." "Why not?" Squire asked. Something his parents never realized If they could only have given him a reason that made any sense to him, he would have been perfectly willing to comply. But always they heard the question as obstinacy or antagonism or stupidity, and they had ice sculptures arriving in half an hour. Because of course you can't, his mother said, her egret feathers performing an exasperated semaphore. Because if you do, you'll regret it, his father added. Squire and Mr. Clancy hadn't spent enough time together for this threat to have any clear meaning, but that made it all the more ominous. Squire tried. He did try. But all evening he felt the mounting pressure of his unvoiced enthusiasm, which the empty chat of the other guests tacitly labeled monstrous. Listening to them, parroting their cliches with difficulty, and stopping his mouth with champagne every time a tray floated by, Squire began to reach the limit of his endurance. He was going to do it, he realized, as a brace of spinster cousins approached him. He was going to talk to them about sewers. He fled the party without notice. Outside, the frigid air and twinkle of stars and gaslights raised tears in Squire's eyes. He was panting as if the sprint down the house's staircase had been a marathon, his breath clouded. Fuck, he said, into the darkness. Hansom cabs and vis-a-vis sleighs were milling in the driveway as guests arrived in a steady trickle and, less reliably, departed. Furtively, impulsively, Squire joined the less reliable. I'll stop there. Thank you, guys. Hello. I think I'll just keep this mic, if that makes sense. Does that work, Lucas? Okay. I have it. I love this table. Sorry, I didn't get to look at it before.
Small and blobular. Thank you for that reading. As you know, Squire is my absolute favorite character.
I could tell, yeah, Denise and I were talking a little bit about it, and it affected my choice of passage.
And I'm sad that you ended that scene where you did, because it gets weirder and hilarious.
He's on his way to the sewer.
Yeah. So Squire is such an interesting character. He has all these obsessions, sewers, caves. Did you also have to become as obsessed as Squire about these topics?
Starting with a call out immediately. I think my editor, there's a little bit of like the other way around, that my editor has accused me of like giving my obsessions to characters as an excuse to write about them. So there is a certain amount of that happening. But yes, he's very into the sewers, he's very into trains, and I definitely have ended up spending time at like in transit museums and learning things about like the history of the New York City subway system that I might not have foreseen happening for me without this book, without this particular character. And some of that has stuck around. Like the book exists now and it's out in the world, but I will still find myself kind of, if I have the opportunity to learn something new about public transit or infrastructure, kind of having a little Squire in my head, being like, well, that's interesting, get more into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it that sort of obsession or topic that you can delve into that guides your writing in general, and this book in particular? I know the book isn't about sewers, it's more so about soap, but like, do you like to pick a particular topic and then just kind of go crazy?
That does tend to be the seed of things. I would say that it tends to be like learning about something, like you mentioned the Procter & Gamble origin story, that's part of it for sure. Like learning about some niche subculture that tends to be the inspiration. But like I can't stop thinking about a certain thing. The soap industry is part of this as well. Perfume, the history of the perfume industry being another thing that there's a character who that's like a specialty for. And that's definitely something that did not come naturally to me. I have no palette in particular. Like, so I had to kind of like learn a lot in the early days of working on this project about the history of the perfume industry.
Yeah, there's a lot about soap and perfume and scents, and it just makes me wonder, do you really love soap? Like, why soap?
Yeah, I mean, it is the Procter & Gamble. I was born in Cincinnati, so they are big, like, Cincinnati lore. And so it has been through inventing and, like, coming to love these characters, I have had to learn more about it happened the other way around. I was like, I made up these people who love soap, and then I had to learn about soap so that I could like love them better and explain them better. But it has involved a lot of like, I've been interviewing various friends who make soap. Like making soap at home as a hobby now is the closest thing we have to like how it used to be done industrially around the turn of the century when this book is set. So I've learned a lot about home soap making. I have not yet like crossed over into being a home soap maker myself, but that's something to look forward to.
I am familiar with the soap makers, the home soap makers, many in my family. This book is, you liken it a lot to more historical fiction, like Edith Wharton novel of manners types of books. So could you explain to people who might not know what a novel of manners is, and does your book follow that form?
That's great. I love this question. And I'm sure if you know the actual objective answer, like, please let us know, because I'm sure that there is one. My sense as someone who's just like a huge fan of novels of manners is that, like, historically, my sense is that it was first coined as like a way to differentiate in the early days of the form from like adventure stories. So like, it's not Robinson Crusoe, it's Jane Austen, right? Like, we're not like trying to survive in the wilderness. We're like visiting our mother-in-law, and like that kind of, that's where like the drama comes from. So I experience these books as like anything where the plot and the conflict and the tension is driven by a story of like how people behave or misbehave in like group settings, and like the tension between like societal expectations and like individual personalities. And like, just if you're a certain kind of person, that's enough drama and anxiety and fear to like lead to like an entire like complex plot. So like, I think that it's any novel where it's like, you're going to visit your mother-in-law and it's very stressful, and it's not like, and then my mother-in-law and I witnessed a murder and solved a murder mystery. Like when where the drama is driven by like human psychology, I would say.
That sounds a lot like most fiction these days, though. So is it just every book that we're reading is actually secretly a novel of manners, or is that term just have a place in time that's no longer relevant?
That's a great question, because I think that it's at least partly like a marketing question. I feel like no book is ever marketed now as like a novel of manner. This one is in some circles, but like largely because of the historical tradition, it's stylizing. But I wonder, like, I think if like Jane Austen were writing now, her books would probably be marketed as rom-coms, just because they're like funny as hell and then people get married at the end. So I think that maybe part of it is just a question of how we sell things has changed. But yeah, I think that perhaps like all like literary fiction nowadays might be called novels of manners in a different, I don't know, come back. People think about this and let me know. And if you have anything that like, that if you do know of things that are being like talked about and marketed this way, I'd like want to know about them, because I bet that I will love them. But I don't hear the term very often, but perhaps we should.
Well, another clear difference between your novel and Edith Wharton novels are you're writing historical fiction, and she was writing about present.
Yes.
It's not historical. It was just that how it was. So what do you feel like is the big difference between being able to write about this time in the past versus reading something that took place in that time? That's
a great question. I think that part of it has to do with the like narrative voice a little bit, which like I have this like highly omniscient narrator and who can like see very far into the past, with which someone like Edith Wharton, like that was often a voice that she wrote in. But because I'm writing from the future, that like the narrator can also see like 100 years into the future and kind of have that context. That's part of it. So there's it's a little bit modernized in that way, that we can have like a narrator who's definitely like a couple of waves of feminism ahead of Vivian, the main character. But I think also there's this really lovely like clarity in being able to look back at historical fiction or look back at the fiction be a writer of historical fiction, looking back at the novels that have inspired me, to kind of have that continuity of knowing, like, for good or for ill, like people have always been people. And so it can kind of give you the confidence to be like a modern writer writing things set in this time period, when you can recognize all of these like big emotions and anxieties that have been like animating these novels of manners for so long. it helps to feel confident that I'm a part of a tradition there.
I was wondering about the emotions, like you did a lot of research clearly into the historical facts and figures and places, like what the walrus pen looked like at the New York City Aquarium when it opened. But did you worry about, the emotional research or do you, in making sure that you're in the right headspace of what they'd really be thinking, or do you think that, like you just said, they're not that different, so you didn't have to try to take yourself out of yourself? How did you do the emotional research?
That's a great question. And I'm sure that there is like a fair amount of me, like just modern me in these characters. Like I'm sure that I feel like close to them, and I think that there's a lot of me in them and a lot of them in me. But I did try to like distill. My day job is related to like early childhood education. I feel like I did maybe try to distill things down to like big feelings, and the way that it's like you have the thing that has been constant, even if we're talking about 100 years ago, are like the emotions people are feeling. Like you can still have like fear and anxiety and joy and ambition and obsession and disappointment and all of these things that we can really boil down emotions to, and just try to think of like what are those emotions, what are the stimuli that might like provoke those emotions, and what does that look like in the cultural context. It's a way to like make it emotional research when what I'm actually doing is like looking up what the walrus pool looked like at the aquarium. So like, and that makes it more personality driven and less like, here's a like, like Vivian's a product of her time, so she like feels this way about this thing, and more like she's an individual person, not like a paper doll. Like I'm thinking of an example that Vivian is like against women's suffrage, which is not an opinion I share. That this character is like in 1914 and like is like her attitude is that she's become very successful without having the right to vote, and she sees suffragettes as like lazy, or like like wanting things too easy, or like wanting not necessarily too easy, but like not wanting to have success on their own terms, like wanting to have it like managed for them and handed to them through having a vote. And that's like that's an opinion that like her anger and her ambition and her pride in her own accomplishment like kind of come through there. And it's not that she's a product of her time, because she has many peers who are sitting next to her saying, that's stupid, I can't, like I'm fighting very hard for the right to vote and here's why. But so yeah, I don't know if there's a rambly answer to this question, but that like thinking of things as distilled to emotions that come out of personal experience kind of helps you find a way to cut through all like the history around that.
You mentioned the narrative voice as being one thing that differentiates your writing from Edith Wharton, for instance. And this is definitely one of the more unique voices that I've ever read. We have this narrator who is frequently addressing the readers with little parenthetical asides, like, we know this, but we don't know this, and they don't know this. And the narrator is kind of like laughing at the character sometimes. I don't know, kind of taking it all as a big joke sometimes, or I don't know. So how did you come to that narrative voice? Is that also something that feels like it hews to the time, or is that your own creation?
Yeah, it definitely, I'm sure that I kind of like bastardized it, and in the end it's maybe as much modernizing as faithful, but it started for sure from like these original books from around the turn of the century are like things that I love, like, and like I wrote this book because I love reading the books that inspired it. And it is a type of voice that not always but often, especially in Edith Wharton's like short fiction, that she had this very like kind of catty, sarcastic, omniscient and like highly intrusive narrator who like comes in and sort of like contradicts things the characters have just said, or like points out when they're being hypocritical. And I started writing that way to try to like, for accuracy, as I like knowing that I wanted to set something in this time period. And I had never written that way before. And I found it was like so much fun. I was losing my mind. Like it was like, and the ability to never having written omnisciently before, like the ability to like sidestep into a secondary character's head and just like really quickly in like a paragraph give you their entire life story, or something like that was just like extremely fun. And it felt like a good thematic fit for this book, which has like this very wide like scope and scale where it's about like webs of influence. So being able to go like 100 years into the past or the future and around the other side of the world and like explain cultural context that it's informing these characters' actions in ways that they don't even realize was very useful, and really started to drive the project. So the voice eventually started to drive the project. But yeah, it's a weird mix of, it started in an attempt to be faithful to these historical, this historical narrative voice that I was trying to ape, and then it became something that's like very, I think, modernizing in its own way.
And we also have the opening, which is from the perspective of a volcano.
Yeah, there's an additional point of view character of a volcano, I guess. That's true.
Is there more you want to say about that?
How much more is there to say about it? I don't know. Yes, that is, I weirdly found out about that from this is a strange type of research to go into. Like you spend all your time and there's the time you spend in the like public library archives, like going through old advertisements. And then there's this was from a magazine for second graders. Again, like I work in elementary education a little bit, that explained this volcano that erupted in 1815 and like created they called it the year without a summer, that just like we lost summer basically for 1 year, and through a complicated series of events that led to the invention of the bicycle, which is something that makes sense if you read the book, I hope. But like it struck me as I learned about that as I was in the early stages of drafting this novel, and like that sense of like very very counterintuitive, untraceable like series of cause and effect that can like start with a catastrophic volcanic eruption and lead to the invention of the bicycle in a kind of Rube Goldberg machine way, really fit. At the time I was like very like, you know, had complete like brainworms trying to write this book. I was like, that's exactly what happens in my book. It's exactly like this love story about people making soap. So it just, that's where it ended up.
Nice. Their book certainly covers a lot of ground. The narrator, who we may or may not agree with, says that the book is about change. The narrator like insists on this, says that many times, like this is about change. Is the narrator right?
I really love the idea that an omniscient narrator can be wrong, which I agree is like 100% true. I feel like omniscient narrators are confident. That doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about. Like it is just another character. And in some ways, like the more insistent or confident a narrator is, the more you should think of them as like just another character who's saying something. So I do like that. I do think that in this case with this question, I do think I agree with the narrator. I think that certainly I think the one thing the book is about, and anything that's like historical fiction at this point to me like has to be about the sense that things are constantly changing in both like a very kind of comforting, inspiring way on some days, and then in other ways like a very terrifying way, that like nothing is static. There's no like pause ever, either like globally, socially, or just like personally, as we move through life. And I do think that that's kind of at the core of most of the plot of this book. I don't know though. I'm happy to be contradicted about this.
If anyone has read this and disagrees, let us know. Uh-oh.
We're getting moody.
Is this the music? We're going to switch to questions in about 10-ish, 12-ish minutes. But yeah, so Edith Wharton being that very clear influence for you, are there any particular of her books that stuck out as a big influence for this book in particular that you're in conversation with?
Ooh, that's a great question. All Edith is great Edith. I think that there is a lot of Lily Bart from the House of Mirth in Vivian's DNA, just like very like scrappy refusal to put up with disappointments. Edith Wharton was like a remarkable woman writing about a lot of remarkable women. So there's a lot of like great gender stuff in all of her books. And in addition to her great heroines, I think that she writes in this really beautiful way about like masculine confusion. I think that all of her point of view male characters are just so gorgeously insecure and like confused about what it means to be a man, like perhaps because it was Edith Wharton writing them and like of her kind of like relationship to masculinity and like imagining what that might be like herself. So I think that maybe for a modern, especially a modern queer reader, there's like a lot of really great like gender identity stuff there that maybe is sort of being read into it by us in a way that Wharton herself did not intend. She also has a great, like some of her short fiction is really, like, again, like the narrative voice quite inspired by some of her short fiction, but she's got this amazing, crazy short story called The Other Two, which is about a man who accidentally makes friends with both of his wife's ex-husbands in this sort of like socially like mortifying way around like in the early 20th century. And to a modern reader, it feels like a sort of adorable, like queer found family. Like the four of them are like hanging out and like they refer to themselves as a syndicate, which is a word that I use in this book to like kind of describe this sort of proto-polycule. So it's like certainly not intended, but it has this sort of like layer to a modern eye. I think like given what we know of like the highly disappointing way that Edith Wharton wrote about Jewish characters, for instance, I have a feeling that if she were ever to have written about queer characters, it would not have been in an affirming way that felt good to read about. So I think it's a matter of like looking at what resonates in her work as a modern queer reader and seeing how that can be like extrapolated so it inspires something we're writing as modern queer writers. But yeah, I mean, Edith's great.
So she inspires you 100 years later. Who are you inspiring 100 years from now? And what are they writing?
Oh my God, I love that. I think I have no idea, and I love having no idea. But I think that there is something really special about writing. It's quite a therapeutic exercise to write historical fiction about queer people, because through research and through the narrative, like active imagination, you end up really meditating on the fact that queer people have always existed, and like therefore inevitably like that transposes to a confidence that queer people will always exist, which like on a given day can be like very needed to think about and feel heartened by. I think that I really love thinking about like the continuity of queer community in that way, including with like writing and with authors. E.M. Forster's Morris is another book that was really important to me as I was writing this and working on this. And the dedication on that book is like begun 1913, finished 1914, dedicated to a happier year. And it ended up coming out in the 70s posthumously, like just because the homosexuality was illegal in England when he wrote it, and he had to like kind of wait for that to change before it could come out. So this is a non-answer to your question, but I do really like, I mean, I'm depressed that I won't be around to see it, I guess, but I do really like the idea of thinking through what a queer novel of manners will look like 100 years from now is a really beautiful thing to ponder.
And, you know, do you think about how your book will impact readers? Like, what will they take away from this, ideally?
I mean, the ideal is to have that same sense of kind of community that I like, that was a comfort to me as I wrote it, and as I've read some of the books that inspired it. If that is something like that's something that I've been really comforted by in many books, like myself as a reader. So to be able to give that same sense of recognition or community to other readers would be like, that's the dream.
So I've told you that Squire is my favorite character. Who is your favorite character?
I love this question. I feel like I think my editor asked me this at one point, like early in the process of like between the three of these people, and I realized that like from my instinctive reaction that I kind of think of the three of them as my like inside out. Like I think that like there are a couple of scenes where like the three, Vivian, Squire, and Oscar will be like collaborating, trying to solve a problem. And I'm like, this is what it looks like when I think. Like, this is what goes on inside of my brain when I think. It's like these three characters arguing with each other. I think that I end up being a booster for Oscar just because, like, as from your introduction, right? It's just like, an Oscar is kind of boring. Like of these three.
Skip that. I had to say it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, of these three characters, we've got like this like very like ahead of her time, ambitious like lesbian from out of town, and then this like eccentric black sheep of an old money family, and like people hear about them and they're instinctively like, I need to know more about both of those people. And then it's like, and the third guy is a middle manager from Ohio who's a little anxious most of the time. People are like, okay, I have no questions about him. So because of that, I'm a booster. Like, I'm an Oscar booster. I think that there's a lot to him if you get to know him. I think he's got a layered thing going on. But yeah, for the most part, I find it hard to choose between my children.
I just need to read a line which also explains why I love Squire so much. Why was it insane for him to love the sewer culvert, which carried away disease and secreted ancient springs, but charming of him to love the candle, which melted animal fat onto socialite's best linens? Can you say more about that and the contrast and the constructions that he's pushing against?
Yeah, sure. I feel like that line is so funny. It's like, I guess that there is depth to that. Like there's something about like the core of that like novel of manners thing that like there's and with particular poignancy for like a queer character who's trying to understand his own identity and like why certain parts of his identity are like shameful or need to be repressed or kept secret, and why other parts are like something to be celebrated. So there's like potentially a poignancy there, and some tragedy. And then on the other hand, there's like Squire is just like a little weird kind of, not like an alien or kind of like a Seinfeldian figure. There's a certain amount of like, what's the deal with candles that's going on with him in some places, that he has like he can be a little bit of he can really distill the idea of a novel of manners down to like its very core of like, why do we do any of this? And like the pain and hopefully the humor of having someone in the room who's like ready to act crazy, compared to expectations.
Did you have a favorite scene from the book? And also, separately, do you have one that you had to cut that you're sad about?
Oh my God, I love it. What a good question. It's possible that if there's something I had to cut, I have gone through the stages of grief and forgotten what that would have been. I will say, like, my favorite, which probably shows, is certainly, I think, the sequence in the aquarium, that we have like a kind of midpoint, slightly climactic scene of a lot of emotional and physical confrontation at the New York Aquarium, which a lot of research went into, and a lot of like delighted blocking about basically like learning about how the aquarium used to be laid out, which was a lot of very like above ground pools with very irresponsibly low railings. And as soon as I kind of was seeing how that was laid out, I was like, somebody's going into one of these tanks. Who will it be? What will that be like? It was very exciting to write. And yeah, I think there's a lot of joy even in the memory of getting to like construct that scene, which ended up also being very like emotionally climactic for the characters. I can't recall anything that I had to take out, although actually part of it is simply that the aquarium scene used to be quite a bit longer. And I did have to spend a certain amount of time realizing that maybe the reader didn't need to know quite so much about the aquarium. This is where the Squire in me comes out, where it's like, we don't actually need to know like how the pumps worked that got the water in. Like, people, that's not important to everyone.
Maybe it is to me.
I'll send you the extended cut.
Extended director's cut. Speaking of New York, you have written this book about New York. I have also written about a book that takes place in New York. There are a lot of books about New York. I have to ask, what is it about New York, and why do stories about New York seem to transcend the place itself?
That's a great question. I think it's open for debate whether they do. I think I'm a New York transplant. I've lived in the city for 12 years now, but am not from there. And I think that like there's a constant question for me about like whether New York like deserves its sense of itself as like the center of the universe, like to what extent that is deserved and to what extent it's like just another town and like needs to settle down. I think that in this case, this book is like we read from Squire, who's like the lifelong New Yorker, but Vivian and Oscar are both transplants and both have, I think, that kind of sense of like being obsessed with and overwhelmed by this town, but also like very judgmental and resentful of it in different ways that maybe is, for me, at the heart of a New York story. I think maybe it transcends itself just based on volume, just because like it's enormous and there are many people there. I think that so much is possible there just because of the size of it, that especially for a story like this set in this time period where we have characters who want to like invent a secret world like within society without like kind of hidden in plain sight without notice. It maybe needs a city that big, and it's the only city that big that I personally have spent time. But yeah, I think that in general, I'm just interested in setting and sense of place in fiction wherever that might be. And this maybe just based on size, that means that there are a lot of New York books because there are a lot of New York people. But I think that they're like, I'm ready. I need the Madison like version of this. You know, like there are amazing things that have been happening everywhere in the world for as long as folks have lived there. So,
All right, Madison, it's time for Q&A. If anybody has questions. If not, I have a few more questions. People can keep thinking a little bit. But if so, you could just start lining up by that microphone over there. Is it on? Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll keep asking questions, but please feel free to stand up and go to the microphone, and then we'll let you ask your question. The first image that you wrote for this book, was it the same as the first image in the book? You know, there's this lovely opening where she's learning how to ride a bike for the first time. That really gets at the impending sense of potential collapse, but also like exhilaration. That really, it sets the scene very well. But so was that the first image that came to your mind, or was it something else?
Yeah, actually, in this particular case, not every project is like this, but the first 3 chapters of this book are kind of introducing the 3 central characters, and I always want to call this Dickensian. I don't think I actually know enough about Dickens to like say this, but like that we get sort of like from childhood until the moment the 3 of them meet, we get their like the origin stories of kind of each one. And I did write them in that order, like in that way. I think at the time I maybe thought I didn't know if I always knew that the book would begin that way, but it might have felt at first like a character exercise or something, like getting to know these characters. But then it felt like that was right, like to introduce them in that way. And then like once I had them, I could kind of like push them together and have the rest of the book be sort of like what would happen if these 3 people met. Mm-hmm. So it did end up being that way. Like, yeah, and I think that they were introduced in that order, right? Of like Vivian, Oscar, Squire. It kind of like felt right. It felt like that's the order they should meet each other in.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Question?
Hi. So one of the things that I really love that you just described the characters as was like that they're like a proto-polycle. So did you go out kind of like setting like, oh, I want to write about this type of like relationship, or was that kind of like found as you were like developing the characters?
That's a great question. Thank you. It's fascinating to try to like write something about like queer people, or like in this case, like you're asking about the relationship structure. It's like fascinating to write this historically because labels and identities have shifted so much. Like in no way would these people have identified as like necessarily even being in a relationship. That's why the word syndicate was useful for me, because I was like, how would these people describe themselves? What would they call what they have going on? Like not a throuple. Like what is their situation? And so it's really interesting this is sort of about like the emotional research to emotional historical context. Try to like challenge myself to like think through how they would like conceive of their relationship to each other and their connection in a way that's like within the historical context that they lived in. So I felt kind of emboldened, like the more that I learned about like historical queer community in New York City and like how much it like was like existent and thriving, and like there wouldn't have had like the same labels for these relationships, but they wouldn't have had like no context for what they were doing or what it could possibly have been like. So it was something that I tried to keep in mind to make sure that I wasn't like over modernizing like my sense of like their comfort, but I felt like it ultimately was kind of freeing, because I felt like free of any kind of modern sense of like, well, how would you define this? What do you have going on? Like, what's your ethical non-monogamy? like, and it also, because it's fiction and we want people to like make mistakes and offend each other in a way that we wouldn't in real life, that it kind of opened up the lack of like labels for what they have going on, kind of opened up some interesting like dramatic potential as well. Thank you. That's a great question.
Do you have any particular lines that you wrote that you really like that nobody asks you about? Or do you not remember your sentences?
That is a great question. I do not think about this. Maybe it's just because there's so much, the sentences in this book are so many and long. I'm never like, why are people never asking me about this paragraph long sentence? I do not have a specific, I feel like I have, and also I never would think of things in terms of like, why is nobody asking me about this? I do have like, I think I have moments of pride, certainly like in like for little kind of like fiddly things. I'll never forget, like in doing like a strange, one of many strange like research deep dives, looking into like what the aquarium was like and like what was going on there, that there was learning that there was an exhibit at the New York Aquarium in the late 1800s of like mosquito larvae, which like this is in the book, that like because I was so excited to find it, that they had like a mosquito hatching exhibit, and I was like, that's insane. Why would you do that? Why would you have like, it's like here's our sea lions, here's our walrus, like here's our tub of mosquitoes. Like, why would you need that? Like, nobody needs to know. And it led me to being like, who is the freak who goes to the aquarium and is like, I need to look at the mosquitoes? And I found I had an answer. Oscar, everyone's favorite character, Oscar. That helped me like characterize him. I was like, that's how like it both was like something that I like. It was an inside joke with myself that I was going to feature the mosquito larva exhibit from the aquarium in the book. But then I was like, I hope I can like show something about Oscar by having him be drawn to this and be like interested in why it's there, and like ignoring all of the objectively much more interesting stuff. So that's something. Like I never wonder why anyone, like, of course nobody's asking me about that. Like, why would you? But yeah, like it's a, I feel like a little bit of like it's like that I have like this ridiculous thing in my book that was already ridiculous for existing 100 years ago in the aquarium anyway. That's something I'm weirdly proud of, like in the moment, but yeah.
Was that the most surprising like research archival find that you found in all of your research, or were there more surprises?
I feel like there are probably multiple things that rise to that level. It's the ones that make you laugh, or like not necessarily like, who's to know what like the criteria is for like most interesting, but like some of the most pleasing ones are the ones that are funny. There's a scene or an element in this book that takes place at a child's pancake restaurant, which is like allegedly, again, New York loves to like claim that it invented things, but allegedly the first like chain restaurant. And it was at a time where like the thing that was like, it was like a novelty. It's like there's multiple of them and they all have the same menu. Like people were like amazed by that. And that's like something that was it was easy as like a modern reader or researcher to like laugh at the idea of like folks in the 1800s like having their minds blown by the concept of like two locations of a restaurant that served the same food. But then I was like, that actually would like be a game changer if you could like tell friends to go to a different location. So I don't know. I think that it's fun to, it was valuable to me to like rebrand research as something that could be like playful and generative in that way, and to get to know, to kind of like get inside characters' heads in like a fun way in that sense.
Do you have any questions for the audience? I have a question.
Raise your hand if you've read historical fiction before. Okay, most people here. Nice. Raise your hand if you've read Edith Wharton. Only on this half. I know, yeah, if you want to.
Maybe we should have started this with a
summary.
booster for Edith Wharton. No, no knowledge needed, but like, yeah, that she is a great. If you're interested in historical fiction, because again, as you said, she was not writing historical fiction. She was writing, like, like snide stories about her weird friends. But there's like a real like timelessness to them, and they're very funny, but also often very heartbreaking. Depending, if you want recommendations on which funny versus sad, let me know, like, because they definitely range. But yeah,
You also mentioned E.M. Forster. Are there other big inspirations that you have that are maybe not from that time period? How about some present day inspirations?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's a lot of really great work. Like, again, like if you're thinking of anything that's like about like people trying to assert themselves in like self-policing insular cultures, there's like a lot of great stuff. And I would like love actually to hear from it, like not to put people on the spot, but I am always collecting books of this type. So I know that this is like a group of big readers. So please feel free to like share with me and with anyone else here. I was thinking about, as I was like giving my definition of novels of manners and thinking about like how they might be like rom-coms, I was thinking like if they're written about young people, I think that they probably get labeled now as like coming of age stories, like whether they're light or dark. But so I was thinking about Idlewild, which we like both read earlier this year. It's James Frankie Thomas, right? That's the name. But the sense of like it's about like what is like normal and abnormal behavior within this like the world of this like very insular, crazy to me, not knowing much about it, like private high school, also in New York City. so but like that. It's unlike this book in like every way, but I think that like that kind of a sense of people, like kind of queer people finding themselves behaving in very individualized ways within this like very like kind of panopticon society in its own way. Yeah.
And your other book, Glassworks, do you feel like this book do they take place in the same universe? Do they talk to each other at all?
I love that. As a David Mitchell fan, I would love to think that every book I might ever write would take place in the same universe. I think it's like a great way to become like maximalist without having to necessarily be too maximalist in any one given book. So I love that. I've never thought about that before, but now I'm going to enthusiastically say yes, they do take place in the same universe. Glassworks is tough. If I am saying that, I'll have some challenges because Glassworks, it's like a multi-generational family story, so it takes place over a century, starting in 1910 around. So there could be overlap between these characters, but yeah, it takes us all the way to basically the present day. I think that they do talk to each other just in the sense of being historical fiction and largely about queer people, and that I'm like reaching back and trying to think about like emotional continuity. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the impetus, the nub of the idea was not the historical moment when Procter & Gamble was formed. Is that right?
Yeah, it actually isn't, in the sense that the question, for if anyone couldn't hear it, was about like whether the impetus of the idea was the historical moment that Procter & Gamble was formed. Yeah, and it actually wasn't because I stole it. I said it that they were like earlier in the 19th century. They actually got historically the start of the company was that they had the great luck to be like contracted with the Union Army during the Civil War to provide them soap. And that in my book, it's like we're in the early 1900s, and the equivalent boon to the company is the contract with the New York subway system. So it was, I moved things around based on like when I wanted to be writing about. I want like knowing that this was like the most interesting moment for me in New York's life, this like great like technological and social change. So I took one of many ways I took huge liberties with the story of the founding of Procter & Gamble, but yeah. Thank you.
How many think that she needs to go to the Mustard Museum sometime this weekend?
I know, I'm very excited to be headed to the Mustard Museum.
I'm excited for you.
The next book will be about mustard.
What is that book about? You know, pick a time and a place. If you had to write a book about mustard.
Well, I'm about to find out what the most, as anyone who's local maybe already knows if you've been to the Mustard Museum, I'm about to find out what the most interesting year in the history of mustard was. We'll find out.
What are you working on next?
It's kind of like, thank you, that's a very generous question. The tied to the our conversation about New York City, I sort of like had a little bit of an allergic reaction to spending this much time working about it. Like as someone who grew up in a rural area, I sort of came out of this book saying like, you know, like interesting things happen in the woods too. So I have been working on sort of like small town, like rural New England novel. So that is what I'm working on now. And a little bit of a swing, a dramatic swing away from having to do quite so much municipal New York research in order to write a scene of two characters eating lunch.
Amazing. I think that pretty much can wrap it up unless anybody has any last burning questions. Also, you know, you'll have the books out there. You'll be available for signing. You can go up and say hi. Just right around the corner, Remove One's Own is selling the books. And thank you so much for coming. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
all.
And thank you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you.